Professor McLeish has kindly agreed to answer some questions. Now we have 2 roving microphones, so if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and wait for the microphone to be brought to you. I might also ask that you keep your questions concise and to the point. Right, I think we have questions to start off.
Hi, I'm Donald McHugh, the chaplain for the university. Why does it say a theology of science and not a philosophy of science on that last slide?
It could say, thank you, it could say either. I think what I mean, I could say I have mined the resources of theology for a philosophy of science. Where you might be driving towards a question that Sally Shuttleworth in Oxford asked me on Tuesday after the talk seminar, which is, great, why the theological baggage though? She was Thessalonian, and that may be behind what you're asking. It may be perfectly possible to create a positive reconciliatory, participative theology of science, philosophy of science that completely bypasses the theological route, but I haven't seen it. What I do need to do is to look at George Eliot, because George Eliot was saying things about science in Middlemarch and other places quite similar to this, and she was reading John Stuart Mill, Auguste Comte, and so forth. But of course, in the modern world, it's very hard to trace roots of all ideas. Does that get somewhere towards that? I've skirted around the question. I know I haven't answered it because, well, I've answered it because it's a theological source for philosophy of science.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm allowed to follow up, I mean, you said that you wanted to get away from skirmishes on the boundaries between theology and or religion and science. But what I'm curious about is actually, given that last slide, in fact, the whole of the lecture, I didn't hear an engagement on a specific issue as to how understanding an aspect of nature, say, cosmology, the creation, life expanding, etc. What I'm interested in is, I'm still hearing a story that is either a scientific story or a story that is a religious story, and I was waiting to hear a sort of a story in which was neither theological nor scientific, but was simply an inquiry after truth. I'm still hearing those divisions, and that page there seems to me to be still to have that division in that, God is not there, and that's what I'm getting at. It's not that there's too much baggage, it's that there's not enough.
Oh yes, he is. He's there all the time. And the wisdom literature tells you that God is hidden, but there all the time too. Now, so we say this thing. If you're with me on this one, if a theology of science is going to operate in a secular world, then God is going to need to be hidden some of the time. Otherwise, you're just skirmish, needlessly. And that's not, I think, being disingenuous. But if one has, for example, a Christian or theological motivation for any great social change, it doesn't necessarily do to wade in with both elbows and announce to everyone exactly where you're coming from. So I wouldn't say that. Perhaps in debate. But engaging with a particular issue, one might goes on to say that actually the GMO debate, for example, is a practical way in which you can earth this. I expected to reach a rather conservative conclusion in doing this work. Something that surprised me is that quite the reverse emerged. So.
Hi, my name is Manfred Lemana from the Economics Department, so I'm not a scientist, not certainly a religious person. Just to put things into perspective, most scientists either don't believe in a personal God or don't care. And most scientists either think that religion and science are on different levels, as you explained, or are incompatible. So your position is, in a sense, a minority view within a minority position, insofar as you believe in, if I quote you correctly, a linear history from creation to new creation. So you are an accommodationist, but with a particular slant. But that implies a vision of history.
Squeeze into that pigeonhole while you finish.
Sorry?
I just squeeze into that pigeonhole while you
I'm putting you, sir. It's not a pigeonhole of my making. Underlying this, there is an incredible, not reinterpretation, but rewriting of history. I mean, is it a coincidence that the Dark Ages coincided with the total rule of the Church? Is it a coincidence that science as we know it today started when people were no longer afraid of being burnt on the stake? And I could go on and on and on.
I'll tell you which one of us is rewriting history, and it's you, sir.
Religion has always been on the side of science, of course. I apologize.
No, can I just... of course there's much cruelty, and there is by no means, churches and power structures handling that. But my own study of the history of the Dark Ages is convincing me rapidly that the only dark thing about them is our ignorance of them. To take an example of, well, we've already looked at Robert Grosseteste, for example, a very senior bishop in the church's hierarchy in the height of these ages you would call dark, is reading pagan philosophy, commentated on and added to by a very creative Islamic milieu in the early Middle Ages, and talking about it very freely in a Christian North Europe. Now, this is the place where, apparently, according to your narrative, heretics like you are supposed to be being burnt at the stake at every street corner. They are not. It is the most extraordinarily open intellectual society. Nor is it ignorant. I've also come to the conclusion that without the 3 centuries and the progress of intellectual thought on scientific method, on not just Grosseteste, we've got Roger Bacon, Arem particularly, the Oxford calculators, these are the pinnacles that we know. There are many other people behind that. These were the centuries where the questions, where it was being formulated, what are the questions we can ask? Furthermore, and this was within a theological milieu, furthermore, the early modern explosion of science, the era of Francis Bacon, Copernicus, Kepler, Newton, Galileo, Boyle, Wren, all that lot, all of those supposedly acolytes of a new secular age were explicit in their Christian theologies for why they were doing science. I can give you some references on that.
Just a comeback.
I've not written a word of history in vain.
Just one minute point. I think there is a deep misunderstanding between science and scientific method. What you point out are individual, let's call them discoveries. But that is not science. You need the scientific method. The 17th century, the greatest innovation in the history of mankind so far. You need a method whereby you can divide what is temporarily correct from what is false. That is not in terms of reference to the revealed word. So that is, what the example you gave there, and you said, well, he was trying to do all this theologically. Of course. But that's not science. Science needs an error correction mechanism that religion cannot, by definition, have.
What I would say is when religion engages with the world, it does science. Science is our eyes and ears and arms and hands and fingers and tools when we engage with. There's not religion and science. Science is a religious operation. By the way, Grosseteste, what you say about scientific method is, of course, very, very important. it would be ridiculous if I claimed that the development of the scientific method was such that this was old hat. It wasn't old hat. So, matter of fact, Grosseteste did carry out a randomised controlled trial on scammony as a drug. The 13th century is a very interesting dawn of early notions about what the scientific method might be. We have by the century later Theodoric's theory of the rainbow, which is essentially a complete theory of the spherical refraction of rainbow, based on what anyone reasonable would call experiments on spheres of glass in his workshop. So I guess I'm with you on the development. I'm just not I'm more of a continuous, I'm more gradualist in terms of development of scientific method than a catastrophist. That's what I'm saying. But I'm absolutely not imputing advanced scientific method back into either early or mid-Middle Ages. I'm just saying things are a bit more continuous than that. But I'm saying that we would be very healthy as scientists and in our schools in understanding a longer history of development of science.
I object as a scientist with 40 years' experience in hearing constantly this comment that most scientists don't believe in God. Very, very few of the scientists whom I've worked with, hundreds if not thousands, have not had some understanding of God. I've only met 3 people who convinced me that they were actually atheists. And I always say to them, well, if something nice happens to you, who have you got to thank?
What I would say to both of you is that the way to establish this is social. This is a question that can be established by proper quantitative social science methods. But I would say to both of you, of course, it depends on how you ask the question. So I could point you to so the most recent publication I know is the American work of Elaine Eklund at Texas A&M, which is a large survey of scientists in the UK, and she's working in, I think, 20 other countries as well. The survey looks inconsistent because the percentages don't add up. When you expect, I can't remember exactly how it goes now, but do you believe in God? Do you believe there is no God? You would imagine that those 2 response numbers would add up to 100%, well, they don't. And that's typical, that's how social science goes. So you're both sort of right, but you need to define more clearly. In fact, the only meaningful social science way you can rarely agree on is to answer with what degree of uncertainty, what percentage of people say yes to what question. It's a much deeper thing than do you believe in God.
Actually, that really wasn't my question. It was just that I get fed up having this being thrown at us in every direction. My comment was just actually a story, because you said that scientific method was important. I think last speaker said scientific method is important. And you've been talking about the Book of Job, and when I was involved in game ranging in South Africa, I was reading the Book of Job one morning about 5 o'clock, and it said, do you know when the antelope drop their young? And 2 hours later, I was on a game drive with this beautiful Tswana guy, and he said to me, well, we're going to have the rains this week. It was the end of the dry season, he said. I said, why? He said, because all the impala have dropped their young. Because impala know, somehow or other, and they're not theologians, they know when the rains are coming, and they can hold their lambs for up to 3 weeks, or they can drop them 3 weeks early. And they all drop at the same time, because then you've got lots of little young, and the lions don't know which one to pick off. And just similarly, the people further north of there know that the rains are coming when the guinea fowl pair off and don't run around in flocks. So, as far as I'm concerned, there's lots in the Bible that fits in very much with all the science that I've ever discovered. And I think, was it Einstein, somebody said he was just thinking God's thoughts after him. And I'm very comfortable with that view.
Well, it's very true. So actually all of the great originators of quantum mechanics, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, Pauli, Born, they all made pretty clear statements about how their science led them to God. I found that really, just to counter the point you made, or to illustrate the first point you made. The second point is a beautiful illustration that I'm not sure this is appropriate interpretive tool for the interpretation of Job that I'm proposing. I mean, just in the sort of biblical studies point, you understand what I'm saying? I'm saying that the Lord's answer to Job is not a put down. It's, at least on a permanent one, it's perhaps a silencing. It's a thought-provoking silence, but an invitation to answer some of those questions. And it turns out that very many of the questions that Yahweh puts to Job, we actually now do know the answers to. And I didn't know that we knew about the antelope dropping the young, though. That's added to my list of ones that we know something about now. Thank you so much.
Time for one final question.
Hi. You began your lecture by declaring certain prejudices or biases are the same.
Right.
I'm agnostic but tend towards an atheistic view. However, I might say there's almost a desire that there were some more reason for me to believe in God that would make certain questions in life easier to deal with. I was attracted to the lecture because of the theology of science. I had hoped to find something that might put God more firmly in the picture, but it was something that Don said earlier. The idea you said that science needs some sort of guiding narrative almost, and I feel that's true. I think there needs to be some sort of more moral direction. But looking at your final slide, and again, similarly, I echo part of what Don was saying. I don't see God in this or any need for God here. And I wonder if you could put a bit more God in there.
Let me put God back in the question for explicitly. It's a very fair question. As I've been asked it twice. Okay. So let me say two things. Let me say an Old Testament thing and a New Testament thing. The Old Testament thing, and I should actually say, I'd love to point you to, we'll go to your next slide. Here's an extraordinary thing I do recommend for the theologians here, Paul Finney's recent Seeing the World, Knowing God, published the same year, far more erudite sense than Faith in Science. But what Paul says that from a humanities and a theologian and a philosopher's point of view, that for a fragmented postmodern world, resources are in the Old Testament wisdom tradition, and we're called to participate in seeing of and practicing the world. So, reasons for theology of science. Where is God in this? There is, in a sense, I've moved around 180 degrees from a position which was called natural theology. So in the early 19th century, we have this natural theology that says we can see God in creation. By the beauty of creation or the structure, the Paley's argument of bumping into a watch on the shore and seeing a designer. What I'm finding in the wisdom tradition and situating the larger sweep of what's called salvation history, which recognises that the world's in a mess, and the fundamental part of the mess is that there's a broken relationship with God, and we can't do anything about it, but that only the Creator can, by inaugurating a new creation by incarnation and resurrection. Okay, that's it. When we get seriously to the jugular here, I mean, the incarnation and resurrection are right inside everything I'm saying, believe me. Because it's only that allows us to take this entirely new stance, which rather than seeing God in nature, comes all the way around and stands, as it were, in the same perspective and looks into creation with God and co-creates with him. That sounds almost blasphemous. But you'll know that it's not blasphemous if you know God's command to Adam to have dominion over, that's humble dominion, that's not exploitative dominion. You'll know if you recognise the psalmist who knows that we're made only a little lower than the angels. You'll know it if you hear the echoes of Jesus calling us his friends. It's bearing a responsibility of being involved with God in creation. It's that close. The New Testament thing I already alluded to, if you bumped into St. Paul in the Agora, or in the middle of Corinth in AD 62, as from sort of your point of view, as a Hellenistic Jew or as a pagan, and said, Paul, what is this all about? What are you and your phobes talking about? I don't understand the word. It's sounding nonsense to me. What is this way thing? What would have been his opening soundbite? And I think we've got it. I think we've got it in the letter to the Corinthians. I don't think he'd have said, well, remember Abraham and the law of Moses. I don't think he'd have started there. I don't think he'd have even said, let's remind you what happened to Jesus of Nazareth, because you probably wouldn't have heard of Jesus of Nazareth. He'll tell you about that, but later on, he'd say, I'll tell you what it's about. It's about healing broken relationships. That's what he gives us of. And the hope that we can, as he called it, it's translated the ministry of reconciliation. And for me, that's the most powerful soundbite for what Christianity is. That sounds all very well, but in a hopeless, fractured, hurting, vicious world, that sounds hopeless. The only source for hope is the resurrection. And that's why God is at the centre of all this, because everything that I've said falls into dust if it can't draw the source of energy and hope that is that. So that's the explicit bit. Excuse me, those people for whom that sounded like a lot of heavy stuff, but you asked for it. That's where God is at the centre. But God being God is at the centre, but also can be hidden and hides himself too.
Thank you so much. Can we show our appreciation?